Alright guys, such comic again. I hope you're doing well and enjoying your day so far. The greatest of all time discussion was a major talking point going into this year's World Championship. Some talks as to whether if Simp won the tournament, he could be considered the greatest ever. Kremp is largely considered that in terms of the accolades, but Nadeshot was asked the question on stream last night, who's the greatest ever, and he said absolutely no hesitation that as far as he's concerned, Scump is the best to ever do it in terms of raw talent and also in terms of accolades in many respects. Scump is hard to beat. What do you guys think in the comments below? Hit the like button if you enjoy, subscribe if you're new as always, especially with the rumours as we saw yesterday that Scump was at least talked about to coming back to OpTic this season. Whether that will ever happen at this point seems rather unlikely, but if he did come back, how well would he do? Couple of things to mention. Kremp, I think, was first in practice yesterday in the practice runs. I think today he is obviously racing out there in Canada. He'll be racing again tomorrow as well. So, you know, thought it was pretty cool to see people that actually turn up and support Kremp at these tracks because it's quite a way outside of Toronto. The funny thing is, I think the track, the Canadian Tire Motorsport Parkway, whatever it's called, it's a way out of Toronto, but it's actually closer to Toronto than Kitchener was. So, you know, just thought it was pretty funny. Drazah and Kenny having a bit of a back and forth. We know that these guys won a world championship together back in 2022. Don't know if there's ever a world where these guys team up again. I know there's been lots of talk where these players might go. We talked earlier today that maybe the FaZe team could be in some serious jeopardy, certainly if they don't win the World Cup. It practically took FaZe winning the World Cup last year to keep that team together. So if they don't win it this year, then, and even if they do, it raises serious questions. But they are keeping the same roster going into it. Kenny, where does he go, right? He's on G2. Okay, rocker, but he's going to be playing for G2 at the World Cup in a couple of weeks' time. It's honestly not even that at this point. It's a week and a half or so. But does he stay there? For Kenny, kind of a big thing, I think, as far as I understand, is staying in Texas. He would want a team that was based in Texas. For example, some have said, what about Kenny to Surge? Is that a potential upgrade in some level? Maybe it's something that they could consider, to be fair, but right now they're based out of Vancouver. I don't think Kenny wants to go there. So that's an option. Obviously, if Kenny got an offer from FaZe, it would be worth considering, even if that meant relocating to Atlanta or something, because it would be FaZe. Maybe it wouldn't be the same FaZe that it previously was. And where would Drazah go? There was some talks about linking him maybe to Toronto next season. That's maybe not impossible either. So who knows, right? But I think there's lots of options on the table here. I don't expect Kenny and Drazah to team up again as they did before, because I think nowadays, you know, they would be an AR duo, whereas back when they teamed together, one of them was the sub. At one point it was Drazah, then at other times it was Kenny, and they could do that again if they had an Octane, but, you know, Octane's now retired. So it probably doesn't make much sense having Drazah and Kenny. They effectively play the same role nowadays, so I don't really see that duo reuniting, but where they end up next year is really anyone's guess at this point. There was some Charles going down as well. iLLeY was getting involved. Like, he's definitely trying to make a comeback next year. For all he said about his retirement, he said about his pin tweet. No, I think, was it his pin tweet or did he remove it? I don't know. It was a few weeks ago now. I'll just rewind to see if I can actually find this real quick. Like when he retired from CoD. I'm assuming that when he retired, he pinned it, but I might be wrong about that. Anyway, he did retire on the 23rd of May. Says the post was long overdue. And, well, now he's playing Charles again for a grand. So I don't think that he's going anywhere, but we'll see. This is another very interesting clip coming out of Gotaga. I wanted to share this for you guys because I thought it was very entertaining. You guys may have seen the clip that we talked about a little while ago now, where Gotaga, and this is also during the World Championship, but Gotaga was talking about his team and saying that basically he's not going to keep any of those guys for next year, and he doesn't blame them for playing for kills because he understands that they're trying to get a good KD to keep their spot in the league next season because he's probably not going to re-sign them. That's basically what he said, but he was like, yeah, like he understands that his teammates, or his team, basically the guys that he's paying to play Call of Duty for him and his organisation, are not really here to win anymore because it's been such a disaster. And Gotaga says it here again. This wasn't, you know, a series in the World Championship actually, right? But it was still very interesting because one of his guys in the chat says, oh, well, Kismet's trying his best, isn't he, right? And look, to be fair to Kismet, he was their best player this year, and it's understandable that effectively when they made the roster changes they did, they kind of gave him the keys. But I will say that, like, Kismet wasn't anywhere near as good as he was a couple of years ago, and I don't really think that, certainly towards the end of the year, I actually do tend to agree with Gotaga's perspective on this. But, I mean, it's still remarkable that the owner of the team is saying this. So somebody in the chat says, like, Kismet, you know, at least he's trying, right? Like, he's 1v4 in these guys. And Gotaga's like, Yeah, I don't really see it like that. He's getting useless kills on the map, and then Gotaga's like, well, look, I used to play professionally back in the day. I can tell when you're playing for kills, buddy. And it's just hilarious. I mean, imagine Nadeshot saying this about his own team. It really does, or like Hex saying it, right? I find it incredible, and it's entertaining, for sure. And maybe it doesn't really matter, because at the end of the day, the team was so shambolic that they are going to be totally blowing it up regardless and doing something very different, I'm sure, next year. They've already made one change, fellow for Diamond Con, but I'm not really sure, as far as I'm concerned, that is going to considerably move the needle. But yeah, Gotaga can't help himself with criticizing his own team. So I'll share that clip for you guys in a second, in addition to the clip that I wanted to share here on Nadeshot, right? Because Nadeshot's been doing all these openings on stream over the last few days. I think they were doing like a really big, I don't even really know what these cases are. Wow, like these have got to be expensive cases. Okay, whatever. I mean, I'm sure they're all expensive cases. Anyway, he was talking with Owner Pixel, who's like a big Counter-Strike creator, and he was asked the question, okay, like, who's the best CoD player ever? And Nadeshot, absolutely zero hesitation, gives his answer.
Kismet il joue solo, non? C'est des kills inutiles pour 3 points quand on a déjà perdu l'HP. Tout le monde est nul là. Regardez que les stats les gars, faut vraiment regarder dans la game. Hein. Le problème c'est que moi j'ai joué à Call of Duty les gars, hein. Je les vois les kills que tu fais. Hein. T'inquiète pas. T'inquiète pas bonhomme.
You are a Call of Duty guy, right?
Yes, a while ago. I'm a case guy now.
That's crazy. Alright, but listen, we have a GOAT in League of Legends, right? Faker. We have in Counter-Strike, Simple, Zabu. Who is the GOAT of Call of Duty in your opinion, bro?
Scump.
Scump?
Yep. Valid. Full camp, full
and
camp,
is it
full
as well by a
camp.
mile, like Faker on top of everyone?
Well, there's players that have better accolades than Scump, but I played with him. I played against him. I think Scump is the rawest talent that's ever play the game.
He's one of the godfathers, bro.
This was a big discussion going into Champs this year because people were saying, well, is it possible that Simp could overtake some of those guys? What would it take for Simp, theoretically, to pass a Karma, a Scump, a Crimsix all time? As always, very difficult to compare the eras because as we saw the other day, and we'll have a look at the stats again in a second, nowadays there are fewer events than there used to be. Is it easier to win nowadays than it used to be? Maybe there's a debate on that, but probably not. I don't know. Like, obviously back in the day, especially in the early days, lots of the players were not necessarily salaried at the same level as they are today, but then maybe you can look at today's league and say, well, it's kind of a plummet era even today, because lots of the guys, yeah, they are salaried, so are they really trying to win as they used to be? I don't really buy the argument that it's much more difficult to win nowadays than it used to be, although I can see why people suggest it. But also the accolades are very difficult to top. Crimsix with 38 championships, and maybe you look at some of them and you say, well, one of them was an online frag cup, does it really count? One of them was the Crown Melbourne Invitational with 4 teams out in Australia, does it really count? You know, you can debate these things, certainly compared to modern day majors, but nonetheless, Kremp with 38, Scump with 30, Karma not far behind, Formal not far behind either. You know, it's tough to deal with those type of numbers, but also it's tough to deal with the consistency and the longevity of those players. Kremp, I think, is the greatest for a couple of different areas, but in terms of the best player ever, I still tend to say that it's Scump. Consistently being the best player in the world in his role for many years in a row, nobody was doing it like Scump was doing it. And of course, there was also the out-of-game factors as well. Whether you consider that or not is a debate. But I think just to kind of make Nadeshot's point, I wanted to go back to this. Now, this, if I can actually... the UI on this is not easy to use, so let me just hit the refresh. But with Scump, the criticism to kind of put him down and say, well, he's not actually the greatest is the number of world championships, right? He got his 1 ring, that's all he got. Played many a world championship, didn't win any more than a singular ring. And people say, well, compared to Kremp, he got 3, Karma had 3, Clayster had 3, Shotzzy's now got 3, Simp's got 2. You know, how can Scump compare in that kind of category? What I will say is that for many years, Scump was, yeah, he didn't win the World Championship on a few occasions, but for so many years, Scump was like just insanely carrying his team to just ungodly levels. Like BO2, certainly Ghosts, this was true for, and then in Advanced Warfare, he really started winning things. And even, you know, to some degree after that, in some of those seasons, Scump would always turn up at champs. And in Black Ops 3, Infinite Warfare, certainly towards the end of Infinite Warfare with the E round and early Advanced Warfare, I mean, the entirety of Advanced Warfare, Scump was just the best SMG player by a margin, right? And Zuma could compete occasionally in Advanced Warfare. Like, Zuma was also really, really good. In Black Ops 3, I don't think Scump had any peers at all. People say John, but John was also kind of flexing a bit, and at the end of the game, John was good. But for the most of the year, Scump was just by far the best in BO3. Infinite Warfare as well, I think that was true towards the end, especially when the ERAD got good, that Scump was right up there. And it was just true in like every single game. I think that what's kind of most impressive about Scump, and the reason why Nadeshot hold him in such high regard is like Nadeshot remembers playing with Scump, he remembers playing against Scump and realizing that this guy was just an ungodly talent on the map. I mean, you see it. They go back and play these Black Ops 2 off-season tournaments, and Scump's dropping 1.5s on everyone's head. Like, it's just a joke. And if Scump came back to the league today, he would still be a very, very impressive player. And if he really committed to it, he could probably still be one of the best players. Like, the guy... it was just completely different gravy. And I can understand why, yeah, in terms of accolades, you can look at a couple of different ways, but I understand why people like Nadeshot still say that, like, Scump is the greatest, and it's going to be very difficult for anyone to ever top that. Because even with someone like Simp, unbelievable raw ability, but if you look at Simp's years as a player... You know, when did Scump ever drop a 0.8 at Champs? Like, it just would never have happened. And also, for Scump, like, every season, he was pretty much a top 5 player. And in his role, you know, he was almost always top 1, top 2, top 3. And even in the CDL era, you know, Modern Warfare, Cold War, obviously things were a little bit different then. And Scump was criticised for understandable reasons throughout his career. I think, you know, his approach on occasion was not necessarily the best, not in terms of work ethic, but more so, you know, the way that his teams would go about practicing and preparing for tournaments, and the mentality that he had in games. Sometimes they got criticised. You know, there was talk from some of the OpTic guys that Scump would say, well, you know, we just need to get more kills, right? Like, there's not other issues like that, and maybe that held him back to some degree. But in terms of just raw ability, as Nadeshot's implying, like, nobody really touches. So the reason why I'm yapping on with this in the background is this is Anaheim 2014, right? So this is Ghost season 2014, and I will admit this is cherry-picked, but if you look at many of the tournaments back then, you will see a pretty similar kind of trend, where Scump was just... absolutely farming. I mean, if you look at this number is the craziest to me. Scump had 31% of the team's kills. So he nearly had a third of their kills out of 4 players. Like, that shouldn't really be possible. But it was possible. This was what Scump was doing back in the day. And, like, you know, he played quite a few tournaments like this, where Scump would just have like a 1.3. He'd put his team on the back and they wouldn't win it. Complexity would win. But, like, Nadeshot was playing with this guy, and to be fair to Nadeshot, if we go to Blitz here, he probably had a load of caps. Yeah, look at that, 4.5 caps out of Nadeshot, my goat. And a 1.1 KD in the mode. So, you know, don't underrate Nadeshot in Ghost. He was a really solid player. And look at the KD in Search. Nadeshot had a 1.34. He actually had a higher KD than Scump that tournament. And it was Proofy and Clay that were having a tough time. Anyway, that's a bit of a throwback for you all. But it's difficult to compare the eras regardless. Understandably, Nadeshot's probably going to have his perspective. I think what I find interesting about what Nadeshot has to say is, like, I just don't see a world where Nadeshot is ever going to say that anybody else other than Scump is the GOAT. And obviously you can debate it a couple of different ways, but it's like, I don't really understand what a player would have to do to come along and be considered. I mean, Shotzzy honestly has a run at it. Maybe Simp does as well. But Shotzzy honestly might have a run at it, right? So, I don't know. Intrigued to your perspective in the comments below. It depends what happens over the coming years, in my opinion, for sure. But just one final thing. Total championships for active players. Shotzzy's at 8 now, Priest is at 9, Kenny's at 10, Cell's at 11, and then Simp and aBeZy at 13, right? So, you know, very impressive number of championships for all of these guys. But... it's not 30, right? It's not 38, but of course it's a different time and therefore it's difficult to compare. So very much intrigued to your thoughts on all of this stuff in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.